Okay, so today we're having a roundtable discussion or a just chat really here, and I'm going to sit here. I might need to write on the whiteboard, but really this conversation is about all the things and the lessons learned with all of the geopolitical and macroeconomic situations that have been occurring over the last couple of years. Last year, the conference that we had focused a lot on hybrid working and the changes that, the forced to digitization that people were, the journey that was accelerated, I guess, from that perspective. And so of course, this year we have another actor on the field, shall we say, which is the war in Ukraine and Russia-Ukraine conflict, shall we call it. But obviously, I stole this slide from a friend from Insight yesterday, my supplier, and luckily she's just listed all of the situations here. So I really want to kind of focus on any of these that you have had impacts from, so we can talk about the lessons learned. And I've got a slide to talk about things like, what was your BCP? Did you have one? How did it happen? Like, what did you have to do reactively when these situations have come up? Because it seems like, looking at this list, there's been quite a lot that we've kind of had to react to it, over the last couple of years, and it's been a bit quiet probably before then. In fact, when I first started at the role that I'm in now, the risk team said we've never been so busy. They preferred it earlier when they didn't have to, be so active in their roles. And so, some of the things that have been impacted, obviously, is like a supply chain and customers. And I don't necessarily want to focus on that because we're not all supply chain. I know some of you guys are tech side and that, but let's talk about it from this perspective. So I'm going to just start with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And one of the reasons I wanted to start with this one as a conversation was that where I work currently, it's at a bank, and we have a presence in both of the countries in conflict. So we have employees in both countries in conflict. And interesting for me personally was that brought this war closer to home than ever before, like thinking about, right, but also from supply chain as well. So it came to me on a number of fronts, and that's why this is, I think, particularly important to talk about. And so suddenly it became, now we've got colleagues who, if we sever part of our business in one of those countries, how do they feed their family? So one of our considerations was, do we actually just terminate part of our business in that region? But then there's all these other aspects. Like, I manage Microsoft as the biggest, my whole job is about Microsoft, basically the global distribution and service that we get from them. And so the other things that come into play here is, like, now we are looking at divesting part of that side of our business. But equally, coming up to this point, so divestiture is the next piece I want to kind of touch on, but coming up to this particular point, getting service day to day from some vendors because of sanctions was, yes, some vendors said they could, some vendors said they couldn't. So how do you get kit in? How do you get kit out? So, those are the kind of experience that I've had to be coming up against in my organization, right? And so then, of course, when it comes to divestiture, you've got this additional layer on top that says, yes, you can divest, but now sanctions also consider these bunch of things over here. So really, I just want to talk about your experiences in that perspective. I'm happy to go down this, conversation a little bit deeper and further in those types of things, but they're the things that I've been experiencing really. And you have also a similar,
very similar,
conversation to add to in relation to Russia.
Yeah, so we've got staff in both Russia and Ukraine. And when the war started, we've been talking about it for some while, and we started some planning. To say, well, what if something happened, then what would we do? But then it just happened, and it happened within the space of a few hours. And all of a sudden, it was like, right, we've got to stop talking, we've got to start acting. And we found that a little difficult. We didn't act as swiftly or as slickly as we imagined we would. I don't know if anybody was at James's talk this morning about the tabletop exercises and where you expose what goes right and what goes wrong. That's where we found where we were struggling to make some of the decisions, because whilst we had talked a lot about, okay, what do we do to protect our staff, what do we do to protect our collateral and our data, actually acting on that then suddenly become very difficult, because we had staff who didn't want to leave, because well, it might not actually happen.
Mhm.
We had systems which were both client facing and internal facing, and we had to decide, what do we think is going to happen next? Do we think that those systems are going to be compromised by anybody who got to Kiev? Do we destroy them? Do we retrieve them? And we immediately started then to retrieve our data. So we focused on our finance data and all of our, I guess, technically file share type data, because that's where the contracts, that's where client information and all that sort of stuff was stored. So we started pulling that back to our German data center. And
Simon, do you mind if I ask who your organisation is?
yes, sorry, I should have actually started with that. So I work for a company called Growth and Knowledge, GFK. And GFK is a data analytics and research company. We work in the tech and durables type space. So they take data, from example, from retailers about what's selling in the lines of laptops, TVs, tumble dryers, fridges. They take that data globally, and they're able to then look at and provide predictive analytics to manufacturers about how they might want to actually create products for particular markets, what they might want to sell it for, how they might want to do campaigns, etc. So it's market research, data analytics, that sort of stuff. Operates in 60 countries, around 10,000 people globally. And my role in the organisation, I'm global head of service delivery. So I do all of the end user support. I've got people in 31 countries, including both Ukraine and Russia. And I'm part of the management team for IT services. So when things like this happen, we make stuff work, and we.
So Russia's still relevant, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vendors will want to know that the Russian market has collapsed, and want to know how much it's collapsed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're still trading in Russia. The company decided to carry on trading. We're a German company, and the board and the investors decided that they would continue trading.
What about morale, though? Because I'd have thought the morale of the people in the rest of the company might be affected by friends or people they know
Family
in Russia or Ukraine. They can be seen as being traitors to Ukraine or traitors to Russia. Or
so that's a really interesting point. So I think our primary responsibility was to our staff in Ukraine. So we arranged for buses to get to the border, to get to the Polish border, because that was the quickest way to get people out. Where people initially didn't leave, but then when it got closer to Kyiv, they decided they were leaving. We've arranged for people to get out, and some people had to stay behind, because you probably read in the news, men who are of a certain age had to stay. So we once we completed the can't remember the right words. Once we completed the exodus effectively from evacuation, thank you very much, of all the people that we could, we were looking at how we could provide them work and visas for different countries. So that took a lot of effort as well.
But you cannot work in Ukraine, because the people you've got left in Ukraine might well be in the army by now.
We've got people who are now on the front line, and we get regular texts from them. We've also got people who do things because they're techie people. So we've got one guy who's supporting the president's office to make sure that the daily transmissions go out, stuff like that. So it's not all army-based service as such, but it's all risky service. But yeah, going back to the morale, it is difficult, because we've now got people spread out all the way across Europe. We have Ukrainians in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, and Romania, I think.
So with hindsight, should you have been wargaming this a year ago? Wargaming it, not having it.
You could argue we should have wargamed this in 2017 after the NotPetya attack. Which was
2014 after the.
So I think benefit of hindsight, absolutely. But I also experienced the NotPetya attack when I was working with a different organisation, and that it's linked to this whole topic of Ukraine and Russia. What we found from a VCP perspective, a DR perspective, we had lots of plans for DR. We knew how to recover all the key systems. What we didn't have a plan for was what happens if you lose everything all at once. And that's what happened to this
But there's
organisation.
another aspect as well to layer onto that, which we're also experiencing. Like, for example, Microsoft support everything, and they've continued to support existing customers wherever they are all around the world. So, for
Just
example,
recently.
we've got our services in Ukraine and Russia,
Yeah.
and so they're existing services, and we have no impact to support. So I
Yeah.
was able to say, yep, no impact to support, and continue to give those updates. There were other organisations I know, like Cisco, for example, that said, we can't get any equipment across the border.
Yes.
We can't ship anything in, so we can't provide any support for you.
Yeah.
Now, lots of our services are actually provided out of Europe, so they're not actually physically on site for them, like data center as well. So for example, like there were different implications across the whole of service management in relation to what we could and couldn't do, and how we risk manage actually still serving our customers because they've got money in the bank of the bank that we're providing. But then there's this other aspect as well, like, you talked about the people there. You talked about, we've actually got Ukrainian people and Russian colleagues in this country working all around the world. We're in also 68 countries around the world, right? So those colleagues are actually feeling a lot of pressure of society on them, even though they're not actually part of this actual conflict, so those impacts are there. Like the rest of the company, the rest of the globe actually has to consider that we have colleagues that are in close contact with this situation, or they might feel being, maybe, for example, I've got one guy on my team, he's Russian, and he is anti what's going on absolutely outwardly, and is doing fundraising to support people in the Ukraine and getting them out and all sorts of stuff like that. So the impact to him personally is actually forcing him to be a helper, kind of, how can I fix this, because my government is hurting other people that he can't control, kind of thing. So, personally, the impact that we're seeing day to day is actually coming right down to the people I'm sitting beside or working with. Like, it's not just a location in a world somewhere else farther away from us. It's actually not impacting us. And so, for example, our VCPs go out the window when suppliers go, I can't help you.
So I think, David, you were talking about your business continuity plans, and if you think about most of the business continuity plans that you've been involved with for the last 30 years have been loss of a building, like it getting blown up, as buildings were in the late 80s and 90s, transport failure, people can't get to the office. And so they've been constructed about the things that we had experience of then. Now, we've been, over the past couple of years, we've been in situations where, you would you'd have been laughed out of a room if you'd have tried to workshop some of those scenarios 5 years ago.
And it's politics, isn't it? It's not just physically having a bomb dropped on you. It's somebody saying you can't deal with these people. There's a reputation risk thing. So even though you could support Russia, you can't support Russia because if you do, the rest of the world will stop doing business with you because you're seen as.
But also, like you were saying, that it's not just about the impact on your goods or your services or your buildings or your infrastructure. It's your people, it's mental health issues.
Definitely.
And so these are things that now you have to consider that you would have taken for granted.
And like, for example, when there was a lot of pressure on companies like McDonald's and Starbucks to get out, I was actually personally expecting to receive that pressure because my LinkedIn profile says who I work for. Like, and that attack hasn't happened. They haven't gone after, all of the businesses. Like, McDonald's clearly, and some of them, Coca-Cola, were absolutely, taken down by the general public.
You have a mental health team that goes around and helps these people. Is there a mental health facility or service inside that?
Well, we have, they do have wellbeing services, and mental health is a focus area as such.
Just well,
but I don't know that we have a division. Like, I think HR would handle lots of things like that. There wasn't specifically a care group or something set up specific to support mental health around this. There was lots of communication about being aware of your colleagues, looking after your colleagues. Similarly, following onto the stream of the pandemic, where the conversations there were also look out for your fellow colleagues, like, you know, what's going on for them, notice what's going on, you know.
That's a big difference when you get politics. So
Yeah, we actually tried to look at the way that we were communicating during the Ukraine conflict. And we were trying to dial down a little bit because people were sort of wanting to set up crisis mailboxes and all that kind of thing. And actually, we're starting to realise that by using that quite inflammatory language, actually people can get quite sort of scared and stuff like those kind of things. So we're trying to figure out how we can sort of get the message out, but not necessarily wrap it up in that sense of, you know, overwhelming crisis, because people having just come out of the pandemic was struggling a little bit with that kind of language, having been exposed to it over sort of previous 2 years.
So it should be a routine thing. It shouldn't be, let's have a crisis mental health program for Ukraine. It should be, it would be a really good idea to have mentoring and a mental health routine. And this is an opportunity to actually get this underway and work out what people need and what will help them. But it's going to continue past this thing, and it's part of our general support for our staff, not particular support just for this conflict.
And you raise a really valid point, because I actually thought following the pandemic that, and you know, this has been not necessarily a crusade, but something on my mind for a long time, thinking that like so many corporations, and as a consultant, I work in a lot of different corporations, so I experience lots of different policies, procedures, and ways of working. Many places that I've gone into, they talk the talk about well-being, but I never ever see it being delivered actually properly. Like the pressure still comes to do more in your day job and push you and push you. And equally, we can understand that that's doing business, you know, but the balance is still not there in relation to.
In fact, there's more pressure because as well as doing your day job and working 24 hours a day, you have to pretend to be well-being and you know, say all the right things about looking after people, even though you're also at the same time trying to get more. It seems to me also we reinvent the wheel. I remember when Y2K happened, a lot of people put in place asset management systems to cope with Y2K. And I thought one of the benefits, quote unquote, of Y2K was those asset management systems would continue on into the future and you'd get some positive benefit. But in fact, people just scrapped them as soon as Y2K wasn't some catastrophe. And the same with COVID. We put in place schemes for managing COVID, then we throw them away, then we reinvent them again next time there's a pandemic. We don't reuse them for things like Ukraine.
How much is in that red box, which is like in the recent years, like that is, it's current, like the number of like conflicts or, you know, not normal situations that are impacting day-to-day business is getting, is quite large right now, as in my mind. I don't know of another time where it's been as busy as this.
30 years war, probably.
Well, yeah.
I think around 9/11 maybe.
But 9/11 was also a little bit less kind of, this seems like there's lots of calamities, if we can call it that, at the same time, whereas 9/11 was sort of like one.
It did, but it changed an awful lot.
It absolutely did. It's harder to get a bank account now than it used to be like 20 years ago, you know, so it's harder to do everything. Now you need to prove who you are, like with like to nth degree to do everything that you do, like as a consultant. When I apply for a job, like the number of hoops and the checks that go through every time I sign up, there's no, here's a place where I go and I register and then somebody's validated that and that allows me to apply for every job because it's already been validated once. No, it's done every 6 months if I change jobs, you know.
And it's been delegated to you because you have to go onto the portal and do it.
So, and I think that comes back to then what we were talking about in Conrad's presentation then about what is the right level of standards and how they're actually applied or how they're actually implemented. Because if you think about this, like, you know, if you keep, you know, putting all these guardrails in for people and making sure that they fit into the same standard process that everyone is having to adhere to, then you actually take all the flexibility out of doing business. You make it hard for small, medium enterprises doing their business. You know, you make it hard for people not to keep the latest software, which goes against what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about with Origina about how do you, why can't you go away from those latest versions of software and just, you know,
you really good point because, you know, self-service is making life, we're doing the work. And rather than used to get given a system that let us do our work, now we have to plan our own system. And there's a chance we might get by the wrong stuff or not get some tool we might need. And it seems to me that it's the people aspects of this. Lots of stuff is being laid out by HR and stuff like that. In theory, this is how we're going to manage this. The wargaming thing attracts me because you can get some of the people affected to come along and discover what they think of being pain, what the HR thinks is going to be painful for you may not be what you actually think is painful for yourself.
So would you say we've learned any lessons
I don't
or
think
learned from our lessons?
I don't think IT
you know?
does that. I think that's IT best practice is to reinvent the wheel and not learn from it. But yeah, I mean, well, presumably people are doing this for not just in technical areas. People must be managing this sort of thing just in straight logistics, you know, getting lorry drives and things into places. Surely we should be learning from how they're managing their lorry drivers and their postal services and all that sort of stuff. But I suspect we're not. I suspect we're doing a special business continuity plan for IT technical stuff. And somebody else is doing a business continuity plan for the logistics and stocking the warehouses.
Well, arguably there should be one BCP. There should be one BCP, and that's owned by the business because it's their business continuity.
Yes.
DR should be the techie stuff, should be the IT stuff, and how that feeds into enabling the BCP.
DR is a bad term, because when we don't have a disaster, it's not as if we can't get at our data center. It's just that politically we don't want to use it.
Well, either politically you don't want to use it, or there's a risk, a significant risk that you won't be able to access it in the near future.
Yes, no, I mean, you're saying about some of the stuff that you had done prior to the invasion occurring and some of the stuff that you don't have to respond to afterwards, and you start moving from talking to doing.
Yes.
Now, it's very easy with hindsight to say, well, we could have done these things better. I mean, that's not a learning from your experience, right? But from a realistic perspective, what could you have done beforehand which would have made that better, that is realistic, right? And what I'm thinking here is, you know, I mean, we had this discussion with Conrad earlier. I've gone through the cyber essentials because we chose that, so we could do things like bid for local government business and things like this. So suddenly I became a CISO. Why? Because we're a small company, right? And I've got enough investment in, you know, the knowledge, the tools, setting things up, etc. So it's forced us to do certain things because it says you have to do this, and we're like, fine. We'll say we're going to do it, and then we're going to do it, right? And some of that is simply writing a policy. Some of it is implementing some technical control. Some of it is doing staff education, things like this. Now, if something went horribly, horribly wrong, I could go, well, if I'd have done all of these other things, then I could have mitigated that much better. But what I can't see is what is going to go horribly wrong next.
No.
Right? You know, like with the war in Ukraine, there was simmering tensions for a long time. But there was huge numbers of people who in February were going, this is brinksmanship. And it's political brinksmanship from a business perspective. You don't want to be swinging left and right on what some rhetoric which is coming out of people who are just playing games with each other is going on, right? You need to be a bit more long-term with your thinking. So because the risk actualized itself, then you can say, well, we weren't as ready as we could have been. But you know, the same with the pandemic. It came out of nowhere within 2 months. We went from knowing that we can have pandemics, we've seen them in the human history, so we know we can plan for them, but we don't know if they're consigned to history or not. It's a bit like planning for a meteorite strike, right? I mean, it might happen.
Don't say that, it's the next on the list.
Right, but I mean, in terms of disaster planning, there are disaster plans for what to do in a meteorite strike, right? Which are held at international level. You know, there are actors which I presume none of us are involved in.
I'm certainly not.
Which are to do with that, right? And I think they probably involve a lot of rich people and powerful political people disappearing underground and surviving whilst the rest of us eat each other in some kind of 28 days later type scenario.
You watch too much TV.
This is very possible, you know, but it's one of those things. I mean, what have you got as a plan for a zombie invasion? I mean, it's just probably not a thing that's made it onto your plan.
But so where do you draw the line in business about actually what you actually plan for? Because your BCP should cover like I said, getting the, keeping the lights on effectively in a way. But like, I mean, what sort of list of scenario do you actually go down to?
It's got to be realistic.
It's got to be realistic and pragmatic. So that's what I've been doing. I mean, it's not on the scale of what you've been doing, but I'm having to make decisions which are along those lines.
Yeah.
And then I'm hoping that what I've done is pragmatic in terms of I'm not excessively preparing for things which are not going to happen, because that's just a waste of my time, and therefore I should be doing something more productive with our resources, right?
So you can start off with what has happened to me or my organization in the past, which is always an easy one. And then you can add what has happened to organizations similar to mine. And then you're kind of relying on other people's lessons.
If you're only 3 years old, what's happened in the past is a bit biased, because nothing's happened to you in the past when you've been around for 3 years.
Yeah, which is why you
Do you think
look at
it's
other
not-
people in your similar positions.
Do you think it's not worth enough to companies to invest into planning just in case it doesn't happen, and actually like planning for a scenario, like when the pandemic was occurring, it was like, well, it's here now, let's figure it out. So actually the money wasn't wasted, so to speak.
But that happens, so like a lot of the examples we've used today, it happened overnight. March the 23rd, we suddenly went from it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine.
Stay home.
Actually,
Yes.
don't go out of your house.
Exactly.
And it was just very, very, very sudden. And
Yeah.
in hindsight, we could have all looked back and said, well, obviously, looking at other countries around the world, it was suddenly going to escalate.
Yeah.
And
It was amazing we didn't learn from other countries. We assumed that Britain would be immune.
it was fine. It'll be all fine. And similarly,
Right, but again, I mean, one of the things that's being talked about at the moment is the threat of nuclear weapons, right? So
it's a very real threat as well.
Very real.
The thing is, it was a real threat a year ago as well, and it's been a real threat 20 years ago, and it goes up and down.
Yeah.
And I've lived through a
But
real
from a
thing.
business
50 years.
perspective, there's a limit to how much you can do with that.
Yeah.
Commercially and contractually, I don't put anything in contracts in relation to that. I'm pretty sure there's nothing in contract. I mean, act of God, perhaps it would be covered under, like for insurance or warranties or, force majeure.
But I mean, I guess you've got people who are based in London, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, certainly what my mum taught me when I was about 3 years old was, don't worry, London's first. You will see a flash of white light and it'll all be over.
Frankly, that's the way I want to go,
Yeah,
to be
If you
honest.
get a strategic nuclear war, and my assessment of it, and I'm not a military expert, is that probably hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nuclear power, it's the capital city. If people start throwing nukes to big cities, London is going to go pretty quick. So, that's a likely scenario which you can plan around, right?
Yes.
And then you can say, well, what have we got in that situation, right? How many staff do we have there? What's our infrastructure like? Can we back up to systems to America? And how do you do with the people resource part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult one to plan for, because
that's
it's one
what
of
I'm
these
saying.
theoretical things that everybody expects will never happen.
It might
And I
never
think
happen.
we're too lazy as a global economy even to put something in place to support these what ifs or might happen.
But we don't plan for global warming, do we? We know that we're going to risk existential crisis in 30 years' time or something, unless things change. And yet we blindly assume the company
So
will still be there
arguably,
storing stuff.
we don't ever implement or do anything with lesson learned.
So
Yeah.
if risk management is about balancing
Yeah.
the how much you lose with how much you're prepared to invest to work around that potential loss in whichever way we do it, then surely there's what you should do with every one of these scenarios is spend at least an hour workshopping it, maybe
That's why the wargaming is so nice.
after that, you decide, okay, we're going to pick these for one-day wargaming,
Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
build out,
And that's fairly
and
cheap.
then some. So the amount of time and money that people have spent on business continuity plans, that are watches of documents that they've spent, goodness knows how many thousands on consultants to produce.
A
Aren't
simple
as
one-day
useful as
wargame would be
agile.
effective. Yeah.
with
And
that
this,
version.
this is where my kind of question was going
Yeah.
with this, is that what you've ended up with is a dynamic situation you have to deal with.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter how well you prepare and plan. You're never going to get to like military grade planning.
No.
Yeah, there's a reactive element.
Whereas
yeah.
one would hope a military is able to say, well, if they invade this way, this way, this way, or this, we have some initial plans.
Yeah,
So
you
what
have
we'll do
100
with
different
that.
scenarios and you know what to do. in
And
each
they've
one.
got lots and lots of principles all around it, but that is what their area of expertise is.
Yes.
Whereas what you said your area of expertise is doing data analysis on buying trends for
Stuff
products and
like
this
that,
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Whereas disaster recovery, business continuity is not what your level of expertise is. So you should never really be good at getting people to bounce around the globe, dodging disasters.
No, but I don't think anybody ever plans to do that in a commercial organisation, not realistically, because it's one of these things that I think gets on the list of risks and gets on the list of bad thing might happen, but the actual chances of it happening are relatively low. It's the first war in a long time.
Well,
Which is
on our doors for us.
Yeah.
No, but on
other
our,
wars.
Of course.
well,
But
yes,
the impact hasn't necessarily been felt in our commercial supply chain like it has this time,
exactly,
right?
it's been felt. So
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
to answer your original question, the three things that I learned from this experience that we could have done better. First of all was governance, agreeing who could actually make the decisions, who can make the decision that we are going to destroy a system. So we actually ended up, we do this thing called audience measurement, which is understanding how many people are watching what programs, stuff like that. And so we destroyed our system, which was left in Ukraine. So the governance around how to make decisions. Second thing was timing, when to make decisions. How long do you leave it before you actually say, no, we have to now just stop what we're doing and move to the next phase. And then the third thing was communications, both from a perspective of how do we tell people what's going on, but also how do we keep communications live. So we were trying to keep in touch with the MD of the Ukrainian business, my staff who are actually in Ukraine, and trying to keep people connected and the right people connected so that we could then make the decisions in a timely manner. Those were the three things that we learned from this experience. And just to go back to the nuclear threat, it's now, to our organisation, it's feeling really close because in Ukraine, our people who are still there have been provided with anti-radiation medication. In Poland, our staff there have also been provided with it. In Romania, our team has been told this is what you need to go and buy from the pharmacy. They're not providing it. So it feels scarily real.
Yeah.
This threat that's inconceivable, and I think everybody still hopes, well, of course it won't happen. It just feels very close.
It's one of the issues here that risk management no longer works. When you multiply a small uncertain number with a very large uncertain number, small chance of nuclear war, existentialist threat if it actually happens, you can't do any risk management. You're multiplying two uncertain numbers.
Yeah, it's just difficult to get the head around.
We have been around that. We had like some of this, so we've gone through some of our risk management. Some of it we did very quickly. So like nuclear wars, my conclusion was we're just going to stop. I don't care about my company if a nuclear bomb's just gone off. I'm just going to deal with living.
It actually doesn't matter in the event of a nuclear war because everybody's in the same boat.
Exactly.
In terms of what we deal with in terms of technology, the actual nuclear detonation itself is actually irrelevant, secondary. It may kill a few people, a lot of people, but actually it's the EMP that's going to kill our industry. And that's what's going to put our business regardless of where your data is.
And so maybe that's why it's not a risk that we do anything, in relation
And
to.
perhaps telling your staff that if nuclear war happens, you expect them to look after themselves, not worry about the company, might be good for their mental health. At the time it happens.
So just want to bring this to a close now, and thanks for your attendance to this session this afternoon.
What's the answer?
There is no answer.
That's the trouble, isn't it?
This is really about what was your experiences in your companies, and how did you handle it? And it's sort of, we're all been in the same situation. We're not actually prepared and planning. I think is where we really come to as a discussion. And we're actually being very reactive when it comes to these situations. And I don't see that that's actually going to change. And I certainly am not seeing any industry or any global kind of conversation that says let's do more in planning or in relation to things like this.
If I had a suggestion answer, I'd say don't plan. War game. War game is something you can do cheaply and gives you some insights. Planning gives you false sense of security.
Came up for us recently. Planning around energy potential disruption, because that is something that's come up in the news.
Buy another jumper. That's my personal advice.
I live in
For the
Scotland, I've got
service?
a ton of jumpers.
Buy another one.
I'm happy I can survive the winter without gas if I have to. On a personal note, that doesn't mean to say that my business can
No,
work
no,
if I have no electricity and no
You're
internet
right.
connection,
And-
right?
Yeah.
So that's the bit where we've been looking
Yeah.
at as being slightly more of a realistic thing.
Mm.
And now choosing to do nothing about it can be an active choice. So we're
And that's
discussing
all
it, and I'm
this
just
stuff that
wondering
was
what
on
you
here,
guys
cost of
are.
living, like all of these things that are coming up now, the inflation and interest rates, all of this part's hitting us now.
So as you guys are clearly just a bit further down the track in terms of your, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, from a pricing perspective, we've got great pricing deals for our energy for our data centers, so that's great. But from a interruption perspective, the services that we buy are either cloud-based, which doesn't make them
Resilient.
vulnerable or
Yeah.
resilient. It does reduce our chances because of the way we've got them spread out across the world.
Would those pricing deals be honoured, by the way, if things got really bad? Wouldn't those pricing deals suddenly be reneged on?
Everything's negotiable. So
Yeah,
yes, I would
exactly.
expect if suddenly
Nothing's
because
permanent.
our main data centers in Germany, if the energy price went through the roof, then I would expect renegotiation.
Yeah.
But, it's another difficult one because facilities are protected by generators. If it's just 2-hour rolling blackouts, we're fine. If it's days,
How much diesel do you have access to for your generators?
well, that's another problem,
Exactly,
isn't it?
you know, so
yeah.
like this is the knock-on effect of this is
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
considerable.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. If you've got to
What,
keep
what do you do?
me,
Yeah. What's your organisations doing?
HSBC, I can't tell you, I don't know.
don't know,
No, I don't know what we're doing in relation to the energy crisis really globally, because we're going to have the same issues. We're, you know, hybrid cloud,
Yeah.
we,
yeah.
you know, that includes our own data centers as well. So we, you know, continue to negotiate on prices on co-location and move out of data centers and doing lots of consolidation and all sorts of things. So, but there isn't a specific plan as far as I can tell. Largely, we're actually just trying to take, you know, money out of our spend really for affordability, but I'm not aware of any kind of backup plans for generators and diesel, you know, storing and that sort of stuff from our perspective.
And I see worrying about other things like the move to Asia and whether the major Asian stockholder wants them to split the business.
Well,
So
yeah,
they've got people
and there's
worried that-
multiple divesting actions occurring currently. So, yeah.
Interesting.
And